folks. Well, welcome on board. Good morning. My name is Hassan. I'll be hosting you today for this third of our three part series of webinars titled Emotional Intelligence Now More Than Ever. This idea came to me first, and then Harris and I, my colleague who's with me online as well, helping answer your questions and fielding some questions to me as well. He's with us online today. And he and I were talking about the fact that really we find ourselves in the office here at OKA and among our colleagues and friends using emotional intelligence more than any of the other assessments and tools we've used. But particularly, it kind of surfaced in my mind when I was listening to NPR repeatedly in the car and hearing frontline medical workers dealing with some of the stressors that they are dealing with, trying to cope with the pandemic and dealing with patients, seeing the volume of patients increase, et cetera, et cetera. And that kind of triggered my mind. And when I was talking with Harris about it, he said, well, Hassan, this can actually be a series of a multitude of different ways in which our emotional intelligence really comes to aid us in how we can uh, handle the situation and be able to be resilient in the face of the stressors that we are facing day to day. So, this is going to cap our uh, series here, but I would like to hear from you, and whether through Harris or email me with any ideas that you may have or questions about how might EQ be leaned into so that we can handle a variety of different situations given the times that we're going through and the challenges we're facing now. But if you can give me ideas for future, maybe we'll have more of these webinars based on your input, your comments, and your suggestions that may come in. So let's dive into this. Now, very briefly, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, what is emotional intelligence and how is it measured? What does it measure? Our emotional intelligence is really a set of emotional and social skills that are learned, not all innate, but an aspect of them may be innate, but they're mostly learned. And they collectively establish five criteria: how we perceive ourselves, how we express ourselves in the world around us, how we develop and maintain social networks around us, relationships around us, whether professional or personal, also how we cope with stressors and challenges on a daily basis. And finally, how we use emotional information as well as cognitive information in order to best make decisions that we need to make in day to day life. These are kind of the five different aspects that emotional intelligence measures. They're broken down into this model, as you see here on the screen, five different composites. Those are the five major measurements, and they're further subdivided into 15 subscales. And the 15 subscales are the building blocks of our emotional intelligence. They're elements of our emotional intelligence that we can go in and surgically utilize, leverage, but also impact, work on, develop in ourselves, or manage in ourselves in order to better handle life. All this is to result in an overall well being or emotional and social functioning that is effective in how we handle the world around us. Um, uh, so let's look at how do we lean into our emotional and social intelligence to handle the pandemic that we are dealing with, and we've been dealing with since basically the beginning of this year. All of 2020 thus far has been dealing with this pandemic. Like I mentioned before, when Harris and I were talking and my colleagues here at the office about emotional intelligence and how we lean into, one of the things that kept popping up in my mind day in and day out, I'd be driving and hear on NPR frontline medical uh, workers who are dealing with patients come in on a daily basis. But that was just the tip of the spear. But behind all those, there's an entire society. We as a society have to cope with those stressors that are thrust upon us because of handling and dealing with the pandemic. But time and again, I kept hearing medicals worker, whether physicians, nurses, EMTs, or frontline emergency medical technicians, and so forth, having to respond to patients. And repeatedly, there was a theme of when they were being asked, what is the most stressful component of that? Handling patients who are suffering from COVID or whatever the case may be, or even patients who are not, but they still need to see a doctor for a variety of other reasons. Time and again, those physicians, those nurses, those frontline medical workers said that it really pains me to have to communicate constantly to my patient from behind the mask. And the reason is I want to smile, I want to express certain emotions to them, and I'm not capable of doing that because all they can see is my eyes, who are basically hidden also behind the reflective plastic shield. So there are so many shields that are shielding me from expressing myself to them. But another thing that came up, so emotional expression, because it's suppressed, they were having to really deal with the stresses of their job without the capability of leaning into their emotional expression, which is critical for dealing with patients. But another theme that came up is the ability to empathize with their patients. And how might that be done? Many of them said, I'd have to think twice before I reach over and put my hand on a patient's shoulder when I'm consoling them or touch their elbow. I can't do that anymore. So that's, again, the way to empathize is hindered. So our emotional expression, our ability to maintain, albeit professional relationships, nonetheless relationships with our patients, and our inability to really demonstrate our empathy in a way that we naturally did, all those are hindered. And those were really leading to the stress or the manifestation of the stress that many of those doctors are facing. Now, of course, seeing patients die or really suffer from the pandemic and all of that is critical. But this is kind of the straw that, when added, really exacerbated the professional position that those physicians are put in. But the human touch of that professional face that a doctor, a nurse, or a frontline medical worker has to do. So all of that is to say, so what of our emotional and social intelligence do we lean on to be able to be resilient in the face of the pandemic? And that's what is intriguing here. So out of the 5 composites of our emotional intelligence, what do we, regular average, citizens around the globe, but also the physicians and the medical teams need to lean into to be able to handle the stress that they are facing on a daily basis. And when you really look at it from the self perception composite, 2 things rise to the surface. And those are our self regard, our ability to have confidence, to like ourselves, to trust ourselves, as we will see in the midst of all the stressors that the pandemic is putting on our shoulders. So to have that self regard and not have it be questioned, to also have the sense of self actualization, to be able to set goals and strive towards achieving it. Those are critical components we need to lean into. If they are tools, they are tools that I need to have at my disposal, easy to grab and work with very readily. From the self expression, not necessarily much. So, as you can see, in different situations, we leverage different tools. From the self expression, not much. But from the interpersonal, heavily we need to lean into this as well, because our interpersonal relationships and our social responsibility come to aid us in facing the stressors of the pandemic. From our decision making composite, believe it or not that much that needs to be leaned into. But finally, and kind of the cherry on top of all of this, is from our stress management. We have to be able to face the realities of day to day stressors with a sense of optimism, to be able to have hope, to have some positive outlook in the midst of that gray environment we live in nowadays. So let's explore each of those. Now we'll start by exploring the big 3. This is kind of an OKA-ism, the organization I work with. This is the big 3 are the foundational piece for building any of our emotional and social intelligence. And the big 3 start with self-regard, Self-actualization comes next, and optimism. So elements 1, elements 2, and element 15. Those are the big critical 3 for supporting any other work that we need to do to face tough situations. Self-regard is simply our ability and tendency in light of all my positive and negative attributes. I have those attributes on my radar screen, but I'm able and capable of seeing all those, not ignoring any of them. But in light of all of that, I still like, trust, and have confidence in myself and my abilities. That is critical to dealing with any type of stress. One could argue that dealing with anything requires a healthy dose of self-regard. Okay? Next to it is our self-actualization. Most of us tend to be exposed to self-actualization through Maslow's hierarchy of need, but here through the lens of emotional and social intelligence, it's slightly different. And what do we mean by self-actualization? Of course, it's our ability and tendency to grow, to want to strive and reach our highest potential, which aligns nicely with Maslow's definition of it. But in addition to that, it's our ability, from a practical, pragmatic perspective, it is our ability to set goals and objectives for ourselves, set goals, and strive in achieving those goals. In basically, when I set a goal, I have my mind on, I have a destination to reach. But what do I do on the journey to reach that destination? What do I do psychically to be able to maintain my focus and my stamina in approaching that goal? Even when life throws me curveballs and detractors and distractions and so forth, I stay focused and tenacious in achieving my goal and objective to reach it. Okay? Now, comes to kind of close that triangle of the big 3 are my optimism. In order to be able to be self-actualized and really achieve those goals, I have to have a healthy dose of optimism. Optimism is a critical ingredient here to lean into. And optimism is my ability and tendency to look on the brighter side of life, to see the light at the end of the tunnel and say, there it is. And that helps me maintain hope and focus also on why I should strive to achieve any goal or objective that I set for myself. Now, given that optimism is so critical, I want to expose you to an exercise that I've kind of forgotten for a while. And then again, in the face of this pandemic, I found myself leaning into. Many people will tell me to grow optimism and to enhance it and lean into it, you need to have a gratitude journal. Well, absolutely. But for me, with a high average dose of optimism, I see a gratitude journal as a nice exercise. But when I'm really struggling with something or something that's heavily weighing on my mind, I can't just think of the silver lining. I want to look at the full picture. So I find that this exercise is one that I lean into a lot more. So hopefully it's helpful for you. It's called Rose, Thorn, Bud. And by Rose, Thorn, Bud, what do I mean? If you think your clients or the population you may be working with emotional and social intelligence may not necessarily resonate with those terms, well, instead of Rose, Thorn, Bud, I would call them successes or achievements or something positive happening to me. Thorns are challenges or roadblocks that got thrown in my way or I foresee. And then buds are opportunities, something to look forward to, some opportunity that I'm looking forward to. So I'd like you to think in terms of, since the lockdown in March up to this point, what are some of the highlights or positive things that have occurred in the midst of all this difficulty? What are some of the challenges that you're facing? And you don't have to get too personal, but some of the things that you can identify. And what are some of the things that you're looking forward to? You really have been able or can identify as something that I'm looking forward to, a possibility, an opportunity that surfaced in the midst of all this. So type up what you have here. That's for everybody to participate. Let's see what we can come up with here. And what are we leaning more toward? Wow. So you could see that the successes or the roses or the highlights of your life are really weighing more in that direction. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. But look at just even the visual. As you individually or a collective group populate this, all of a sudden you begin to see where is your attention, what is your focus on more, what are you leaning into identifying and being able to pick up on your radar screen more. Are they roses, are they thorns, or are they buds? Okay, to me, the visual and the tactile way of actually writing it or typing it and maintaining a record of that, either as an individual or a collective group, can really help see how I'm either on the right track or I need to reframe my perspective on things. It's a good, effective, a practical way of enhancing my optimism. Keep on. Beautiful. So I see that really all three columns are populating, but still we tend to be predominantly in the highlights, the successes, more so than the thorns. And certainly you could see that the collective group has populated a lot. So we'll give it a few more seconds. Nice, nice. Absolutely. And also, don't ever underestimate the power of an opportunity is a way that you've been stretched beyond your capability or beyond what you thought you might be able to achieve into new realms, new heights of stretching out of your comfort zone into your learning zone. Sometimes even you're potentially approaching your panic zone, but you can still grasp a hold of being in the learning zone and not going to the panic zone where you freeze and there's no learning going on there. So often our challenges, our learning zones are those buds, those opportunities, and we may not see them in the midst of it, but in hindsight, we look at them and go, wow, that tough situation I was going through really was much better. Okay, so let's wrap up what we're typing here before we go back to exploring, well, what are other subscales that we may lean into heavily here? So we talked about the big three: self-regard, self-actualization, and optimism. Those are essential and critical for handling the tough situations we're in. But two others that rise to the surface that are really, really important are the interpersonal relationships. And interpersonal relationships are simply my ability and tendency to give and receive trust and compassion to whatever degree is appropriate for our relationship, and find that to be satisfying and gratifying. And it's all about establishing but also maintaining relationships over a period of time. So be thinking of what have you done and how have you shifted your ability to maintain the interpersonal relationships you've had in the midst of COVID. Has it been a challenge? Absolutely. But have we adapted? Have we, for example, people I used to go visit on a regular basis say, hey, let's go out for a beer or for a glass of wine. All of a sudden, I found that I have to learn, social media, and I have to learn how to use Zoom and have Zoom calls or whatever other means. I have to FaceTime them more. I have to really, when I chose not to show my face in some meetings, now I intentionally show my face and exaggerate my emotional expression so they can at least read my body language on that little screen. So some of the adaptations that you may have to borrow or lean into in order to maintain those interpersonal relationships. And find out, have you started new relationships that you didn't have before, and how are you going to maintain those? I personally, and I've heard that from many people also, who have said repeatedly, I've struck up a friendship with neighbors I've had for years and I never talked to them beyond the goodbye and hi and all of that. But now that we're in lockdown, I found myself reaching out to them, asking them, do they need any help? Can I support them in any way? So some new interpersonal relationships were forged as a result of the lockdown that weren't even there before. Be thinking of how do you leverage that. Lastly, and that's a big one, and I don't mean to get political because it's been politicized, but social responsibility. Now, social responsibility is my ability and tendency to cooperate and contribute to a larger welfare, to a larger social system, and feel a sense of responsibility. This is less about the I, which is self regard, that's I, ego, me, and now start focusing my attention on the we, the collective we. This is about putting on the mask, not because I need to protect myself, but I'm worried I might be a carrier of that virus and spread it around to others. That's a form of social responsibility and certainly surfacing now more than ever. You hear a lot of people, particularly the college students who were at first not worried about the whole COVID, and I'm young and I can really recover from this no problem, now into thinking, wow, I have to think beyond the me and to others. And I don't mean to paint with a general brush, broad brush here, all of college students, but that's a population that you heard a lot of. Well, I don't care. I can really, I'm young. I can, resist this, or I can live with it fine. But now you're getting the awareness of, but what is my responsibility for the collective, the bigger? Okay. So with that being said, um, let's talk before we go into application of all of this. What I'd like to do is, again, as usual, present the 5 subscales we just discussed and give you an opportunity to put some resources, some thoughts into ways in which you have activated and consciously engaged and leaned into those elements more strategically and more deliberately. Have you reached into them? What resources do you have to offer us and help us all in standing up these 5 subscales or elements of our emotional and social intelligence and lean into them more? With that in mind, I also would like to share the rose thorn bud exercise here. You can download it from this window. It's the second. If you click on it and then hit the download button, you should be able to download that sheet. It's a quick reference to how to generate data using the rose thorn bud idea. It's a quick way, easy way. I find you could use it from younger kids all the way to adults, to corporate groups, federal government groups, and professional groups. But again, if you find that those words are not going to resonate well in the culture you're going to work in, you can use them. You can use other terms for them: successes, challenges, and opportunities, or something along those lines. But I find rose, thorn, bud something easy to remember as well. So it's totally up to you. I see some people populating some of these subscales. Give us some ideas, some ways in which you've engaged them, or a book, a video, a YouTube clip, or something like that, or any resources that you might have in how to really stand up these particular subscales in here. And then I will give you some suggestions on resources as well that I've been able to tap into and recommend to people. Okay, so I'm going to populate this as well here. Now, with optimism, I just gave you that idea of the rose thorn bud. Certainly, a gratitude journal of any kind, if journaling is one of the things that you do. Or can we pause once a week, twice a week, once in the morning, however frequently you can do it, and reflect on and identify and sit with the things that have happened that you're grateful for? That helps increase optimism. And by the way, optimism is one that they've done ample research on. And I used to think, oh, the whole idea of fake it till you make it is an absolute farce. What are we talking about? You can't just make things up like that. No, what they found is for optimism, they've actually scanned people's brain waves by just getting them into a room and having a mantra that they can tell themselves and keep repeating verbally and hear yourself saying it for about half an hour, 20 minutes, half an hour, and then they stick them into a functional brain MRI machines and measure their brain waves. And then they give them a negative mantra of some sort, something to think of and focus their energy on that is negative. And then after they scan their brain, they will give them a positive mantra to keep repeating for 20 minutes, half an hour, something of that sort, and see how might that change their brain waves. And they actually have recorded that. So fake it till you make it may not work for everything, but certainly for optimism, it's one of the things that they can show direct correlation between our thought process and our mood. And that goes to optimism. Okay, that goes to optimism. Social responsibility, let me highlight that to you, that often it is misunderstood about emotional and social intelligence, because with social responsibility, people had tended to think of it in terms of environmentalism. Well, environmentalism is a form in which I manifest my social responsibility, but it does not equate. It's a piece of a bigger puzzle. The bigger puzzle is my sense of duty and responsibility towards a larger collective. So anything we do towards a larger collective, even helping someone out who doesn't have a vehicle to get to a place, that's a form of social responsibility. Giving someone the gift of my time, my ear, my consult, my being there, that's a form of social responsibility. So it doesn't have to be at a global level, it can be at a local level, but it's a sense of duty and responsibility towards the we, and that's on the forefront of my mind as opposed to me thinking of me, and I, and that's about it. Okay? Great. So thank you for the data you generated here. And I see some people still generating more. Let's wrap it up here by going into some resources that I would highly recommend for you. And so let's wrap this up here. I see a couple people typing last things. A couple more seconds here. Okay, folks. Now, let's wrap it up by looking into these final resources that we have for you. Now, to apply EQ, there's always the EQ applied by Justin Bariso. I know in the last couple of times I mentioned that book, highly recommended. Plus his Twitter account, he's constantly putting blogs up there. Something that is new in particular to this COVID situation, there's an app that I found on basically in the App Store that's called COVID Coach, and it helps you through these times with specific coaching techniques and ways in which you can cope and withstand the stressors that the COVID world is putting on us, basically, and has been for the last few months. The gratitude exercise that I just shared, the rose thorn bud, I would highly recommend that. And again, let me just emphasize that there's the downloadable file that you downloaded from there. That is an easy one for it. Also, Jonathan Haidt's book, The Happiness Hypothesis, I would highly recommend reading that or getting it on audio and listening to it, because it really helps with resilience. And anything that helps with our resilience certainly can be a great way to approach this pandemic situation that we're in. So, with that being said, what I'd like to do here in these final moments is, again, you've got our contact information, and I will make sure that you have mine and Harris's. Here's my email. And let's stay in touch. And if you have any other ideas, I would certainly, floated by us, and you've got my email and Harris's email, I would certainly lob those ideas our way. Hey, can emotional intelligence help with X, Y, or Z? Or is there a relationship between this and emotional intelligence, this topic and emotional intelligence? Happy to respond to you, but that also feeds us ideas in what is there on your mind out there. so that we can maybe do some of these free webinars and spread that knowledge or share that knowledge with a variety of different people from different walks of life. Also, definitely stay connected with us through LinkedIn, through Twitter, and through Facebook. These are all there. And if you are interested in taking or getting certified or taking a certification program to get you certified in basically the ability to interpret and administer the EQI and get in a much deeper level in understanding it, there are a few certification workshops. Anybody can register for those. They're 2 days online. There's also the virtual facilitator workshop, which we've had a lot of demand, and a few of you have already signed up for it, where people are saying, hey, how can I convert? I'm an instructor, I'm a facilitator, and I want to convert the content that I have into virtual space. Is there a way to do this in an interactive way? And these are set for exactly that. If you're already certified in EQ and you're interested in more advanced applications of EQ, also connect on the Advanced EQ Interpretation Skills, which is July 23rd. That's the next one that is being offered. Thank you, folks. It's been wonderful spending those 3 times with you. And like I said, this has come to an end, but it doesn't have to. If you give us more ideas, you have more questions, more ways in which we can connect EQ to the world around us and how to best utilize it, give me those ideas. Happy to engage you. And be well, be safe. And it was wonderful spending time with you. And I hope our paths cross in the near future again. Thank you, be safe, and be well. Any questions? Any questions? I'm seeing here that there are no questions coming in. Okay, any questions? I'm happy to spend more time. We don't have to end it. I wanted to respect the people that know that this is half an hour, but if there are any particular questions, I'm happy to take them. Okay, folks. Thank you again, and be safe and be well.